I remember the first time I created emotional distance on purpose, not to punish, not to teach a lesson, not to win, but because I finally understood something that hurt to admit. I had been doing all the emotional lifting and calling it love. For so long, every time they pulled away, I rushed in like a firefighter, trying to put out the smoke before it became a fire. I would check in, I would reassure, I would soften my needs, I would explain myself in 100 different ways, because I truly believed that if I stayed gentle enough, patient enough, loyal enough, they would stop running. And the scary part is, sometimes it worked for a moment. A reply would come, a sweet line would appear, a little warmth would return, and my whole body would exhale like, okay, I didn't lose them. But it wasn't real safety, it was temporary relief, the kind that keeps you addicted to the next message. They had this way of going quiet that made me feel like I was standing outside a closed door with my heart in my hands. One day they were present, laughing, leaning in, and then suddenly distance, slow replies, vague answers, a coldness they acted like I shouldn't notice. And I noticed every time. I noticed because my nervous system noticed. I noticed because my love was always awake, always paying attention, always trying to anticipate what would make them disappear again. The more they pulled away, the more I tried to become easy. The kind of person who doesn't need reassurance, the kind of person who never complains, the kind of person who can swallow their feelings and smile anyway. But the truth is, I wasn't becoming easy. I was becoming invisible. I was shrinking myself to make their avoidance comfortable. Then one day, it happened. They created distance again. Nothing dramatic, no big fight, just that familiar drift, that familiar cold air moving through the relationship like a warning sign. And my first instinct was the same old instinct to chase, to send the message that says, hey, are we okay? To create a conversation they didn't want to have, to carry the connection back to the center like I always did. My hands literally wanted to move. My mind started writing paragraphs before I even opened my phone, but something inside me stopped. Not because I was suddenly strong, but because I was finally tired. Tired in a deep way. Tired of proving. Tired of guessing. Tired of feeling like I had to earn basic respect. So I didn't chase. I didn't announce it. I didn't post quotes. I didn't try to look unbothered. I simply didn't do what I always did. I went quiet, but not the quiet of a game, the quiet of stepping back into myself. And it was uncomfortable because in the beginning, emotional distance feels like you're doing something wrong. It feels like you're being mean. It feels like you're risking everything because you've been trained to believe love means reaching out first. Love means fixing it. Love means staying available. Love means being the bigger person even when it's breaking you. But this time, I let the discomfort sit in my chest, and I didn't run from it. I let my body shake with the urge to chase, and I stayed still anyway. At first, nothing happened, and that silence was loud because it threatened my biggest fear, that if I stop trying, I will be forgotten, that if I stop carrying, the connection will collapse, that if I stop giving, there will be nothing left. And I remember staring at my phone and thinking, see, they really don't care. But then another thought came, quieter and sharper. Or maybe they cared in a way that depended on me doing all the work. That thought hurt, because it meant I wasn't losing a great love, I was losing the role I played in keeping their comfort intact. You see, emotional distance removes their control comfort, and that's what I didn't understand before. Their distance wasn't just distance, it was regulation. It was how they kept intimacy at a level that didn't scare them. It was how they stayed in control, close enough to receive, far enough to avoid responsibility. And my chasing was the cushion, the safety net that let them pull away without paying the price of losing me. Every time they disappeared and I reached out, I told their nervous system, you can do this again and still be safe. I didn't mean to, but I did. I rewarded the pattern with my love. When I stopped, their comfort cracked, because now the distance they created didn't lead to my pursuit. It led to empty space. And empty space is where an avoidant starts to feel what they've been avoiding. Not always love first. Sometimes it's panic, sometimes it's ego, sometimes it's fear of losing access, but something wakes up. And I saw it in the smallest ways. A message came earlier than usual, a question that had weight behind it, not just, hey, but where have you been? And the truth is, it wasn't really about where I had been. It was about where my attention had gone. It was about the fact that my emotional energy was no longer sitting at the door waiting for them to come back. Then came the testing, gentle at first, a casual check in, a meme, a little hope you're good. And in the past, I would have melted, I would have replied fast, grateful for anything that felt like connection. But this time, I watched it differently. I asked myself, is this effort or is this a temperature check? Is this accountability or is this access? Because emotional distance gives you clarity. It gives you enough space to see whether someone is actually coming closer or just trying to make sure they still have a hold on you. And what surprised me most was what happened inside me. The more I stayed emotionally distant, the more my body started calming down. My mind stopped racing. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I stopped waking up with that anxious feeling of, did I do something wrong? I started remembering who I was before the chaos felt normal. I started doing simple things again, eating without nausea, sleeping without checking my phone, laughing without it feeling guilty. And that's when I realized the biggest reason I had chased for so long was not just love, it was anxiety. I had been trying to end the discomfort, not necessarily build the right relationship. Their shift toward me became more obvious when my shift toward myself became permanent. They started showing up a little more, asking a little more, trying a little harder, because they could feel they were no longer the center of my emotional world. And that's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes people only value what they can't control. Sometimes they only lean in when they can't assume you'll stay. But here's the part that matters. I wasn't creating emotional distance to make them chase. I was creating it to stop bleeding. I was creating it to protect my heart from a pattern that made me doubt myself. I was creating it because I wanted a love that felt steady, not a love that only showed up when it was afraid of losing me. And if they come closer, after you create emotional distance, you don't hand them everything at once. You don't reward panic with permanent access. You don't confuse a few messages with real change. You let them prove it slowly. You let consistency speak. You let actions match words. Because emotional distance isn't about becoming cold, it's about becoming clear, clear enough to stop chasing someone who only feels safe when you're the one doing all the reaching, clear enough to choose yourself even when your heart still misses them, clear enough to finally understand that if someone truly wants you, they won't need you to disappear to realize your value. They will protect the connection while you're still standing right there, and if they can't do that, your emotional distance is not a loss, it is your rescue. I didn't realize how powerful calm detachment could be until I watched it become a mirror they couldn't look away from. For so long, I thought the only way to keep love alive was to keep it warm with my hands, to keep the conversation going, to keep the connection breathing, to keep reassuring them that they were safe with me. I would say the right words. I would soften my tone. I would explain my feelings like I was presenting a case in court, hoping if I was gentle enough they wouldn't run. And when they pulled away, I treated it like an emergency, like something had to be fixed immediately, because silence felt like danger. Silence felt like abandonment. Silence felt like the end. But one day, something inside me changed, not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped begging to be cared about. It was subtle at first. I started replying slower. I started letting conversations end instead of dragging them forward. I started noticing how often I was the one carrying the emotional weight, and I stopped picking it up automatically. And I didn't announce it. I didn't make a speech. I didn't say, I'm going to pull back now. I simply stepped back emotionally, the way you step back from a stove when you realize you've been burning your hand for too long. At first, it felt like I was walking away from love. That's what your brain tells you when you're used to chasing, that if you stop reaching, you're giving up. But I wasn't giving up, I was finally seeing clearly. I was finally seeing how my constant availability had become a blanket they could wrap around themselves whenever they got cold, without ever having to build a home with me. I was finally seeing how my kindness had turned into convenience. I was finally seeing how my emotional presence had turned into their comfort zone, and their comfort zone was built on my anxiety. Then came the moment that surprised me. They didn't just stay distant. They started watching. It wasn't obvious, not in a dramatic way, but I felt it. The way they checked in felt different. The timing changed, the energy changed. There was a hesitation in them, like they were waiting for the old me to appear, the one who would immediately soften, immediately reassure, immediately reopen the door. But instead, they met a calm version of me, one that didn't punish them, didn't lash out, didn't chase, just stayed steady and quiet. And that quiet, that calm, became a mirror. Because when you stop chasing an avoidant, you stop giving them a distraction. You stop giving them your emotions to manage. You stop giving them your fear to feed on. You stop giving them the comfort of knowing you'll always be there no matter what they do. And in that silence, they are left with themselves. They are left with their own choices. They are left with the reality of what they created. Your detachment reflects the truth back to them, that distance has consequences, that inconsistency is not free, that you are not an unlimited source of warmth, that they can turn on whenever they feel lonely. I started noticing the way they began to shift toward me, not because I was more available, but because I was less controllable. They asked questions they never asked before. They tried to keep the conversation going in ways they never tried before. They became more present, not consistently at first, but enough for me to realize something was happening inside them. And it wasn't just missing me. It was realizing that I had stopped being guaranteed. It was realizing that their usual pattern, pull away, then return, then receive, was not working the same. Because I wasn't chasing the distance anymore. I wasn't filling the gap anymore. I wasn't begging for clarity anymore. And that forced a new feeling into them, uncertainty. That uncertainty is what people call they start to care, but I need you to understand it properly. Sometimes it's real care, sometimes it's ego, sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's a mix of all three. But it always reveals one thing. Your emotional distance has shifted the power. The connection can no longer survive on your effort alone. They can no longer regulate themselves by assuming you'll always be there. And when that assumption breaks, the avoidant mind starts scanning. Where did they go? Why aren't they reacting? Why aren't they chasing? Do I still matter? Your calm detachment becomes a message without words. You don't get full access to me without full respect for me. And here is the part that made me emotional when I finally understood it. I realized I had been trying to be chosen by someone who only felt safe choosing me when I was pulling away. That's a painful truth, because you think love should be valued while you're present, not only when you're leaving. You think your kindness should be cherished while you're giving it, not only when it's gone. But avoidant patterns are built on fear, fear of closeness, and fear of loss. When you chase, closeness feels like pressure, and they run. When you detach, loss feels real, and they lean in. And in the middle of that, your heart can get trapped, because you start believing your absence is what makes you worthy. So I had to make a decision, a real one. I had to decide that my emotional distance wasn't a tool to make them love me, it was a boundary to make me safe. I had to decide that if they were shifting toward me, it had to come with consistency, not just intensity. Because avoidance can become intense when they're scared. They can become sweet when they feel you slipping. They can become emotional when the control is gone. But intensity is not change. A burst of attention is not a new character. So I stopped getting hypnotized by the sudden warmth, and I started watching what happened after the fear passed. That's when I learned to move slowly, to let them prove it, to let time show me the truth, to stop handing my heart over the moment they leaned in. Because if they were really shifting toward me, they would show up again tomorrow, not just today. They would show up when things felt calm, not only when things felt like they might end. They would choose me without needing me to disappear first. And I promised myself something, that I would never again reward someone's panic with permanent access to my heart. And do you know what the biggest shift was? It wasn't even them leaning in. It was me finally standing still. It was me realizing I didn't have to chase to be loved. It was me realizing that if someone needs emotional distance to value you, the problem is not your worth. The problem is their capacity. It was me realizing that my peace mattered more than their confusion. And once I got that back, once I started living from that place, I became something they couldn't easily handle anymore, not because I became cold, but because I became clear. So if you're reading this with a trembling heart, if you're scared that emotional distance will push them away forever, let me tell you the truth in the kindest way. If emotional distance makes them leave, they were already leaving. You were just chasing behind them, trying to pretend it wasn't happening. And if emotional distance makes them shift toward you, let them come, but don't collapse your boundary the moment they arrive. Let them feel the difference, not as punishment, but as reality. Let them experience what it's like to lose easy access and earn real closeness. Because your detachment is not a threat, it is your protection, and your protection is the first act of love you should have given yourself a long time ago. And if they come closer, after you create emotional distance, you don't hand them everything at once. You don't reward panic with permanent access. You don't confuse a few messages with real change. You let them prove it slowly. You let consistency speak. You let actions match words. Because emotional distance isn't about becoming cold, it's about becoming clear, clear enough to stop chasing someone who only feels safe when you're the one doing all the reaching, clear enough to choose yourself even when your heart still misses them, clear enough to finally understand that if someone truly wants you, they won't need you to disappear to realize your value. They will protect the connection while you're still standing right there, and if they can't do that, your emotional distance is not a loss, it is your rescue. I didn't create emotional distance to punish them, but I won't lie to you. A part of me hoped it would finally make them understand, not in a dramatic movie scene way, but in that quiet way where a person wakes up and realizes the thing they kept taking for granted is no longer sitting at their feet, waiting. For a long time, I had been scared of distance, because distance felt like losing. Distance felt like abandonment. Distance felt like proof that I wasn't enough. So I fought it. I chased it. I tried to close every gap the moment it opened because I thought love meant never letting the connection go cold. I didn't realize I was warming a relationship that kept freezing me. The day I decided to create emotional distance, it wasn't because I became heartless, it was because my heart had been bruised too many times by the same cycle. I was tired of the way I would light up when they returned, only to feel foolish when they disappeared again. I was tired of the way my mood depended on their attention. I was tired of being the one who always reached first, forgave first, explained first. And what hurt the most was the quiet humiliation of knowing I was doing all of that for someone who still acted unsure about me. So I stepped back, not as a performance, but as a boundary. I stopped offering partner-level access to someone who only showed up part-time. And the first days were the hardest. Emotional distance doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels like grief. It feels like you're holding your own hand in the dark. It feels like you're swallowing words that used to spill out of you. I would pick up my phone and feel that familiar urge to send something sweet, something soft, something that would remind them I'm still here. But I didn't. I would start typing, then stop. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I finally saw how every message I sent was a little piece of my dignity traded for temporary peace. I was always buying relief with my self-respect, and I was tired of being in debt. At first, they didn't respond the way I imagined. There was no instant apology, no sudden realization. And that's when fear tries to talk you out of your boundary. Fear says, see, they don't care. See, you're not important. See, you should have chased. But then something happened that I didn't expect. My life started getting quieter in a good way. My chest wasn't tight all day. My mind wasn't constantly scanning for signs. I wasn't waking up thinking, what did I do wrong? I still missed them, but I wasn't losing myself in missing them. I started doing small things again, eating without that anxious knot, sleeping without checking my phone, laughing without feeling guilty. And I realized emotional distance wasn't just changing the dynamic with them, it was healing the dynamic inside me. Then the shift came. Not loud, but noticeable. They started reaching out differently. Not just one casual, hey, but a second message when I didn't respond immediately. A little more effort, a little more curiosity, and I could feel it. They weren't just talking to me, they were trying to locate me. Because when you create emotional distance, you remove the comfort of control. You remove the guarantee that you'll always be there, always available, always ready to reopen the door. And that guarantee is what many avoidants lean on, even when they act like they don't need anyone. They may fear closeness, but they still want access. They want the comfort of knowing you're attached, without the responsibility of showing up consistently. But my distance wasn't a game, it was a line, and lines create truth. When you stop chasing, you stop covering for them. You stop smoothing over their inconsistency. You stop giving them the benefit of your warmth when they haven't earned it with steady behavior. And that's where the boundary becomes the message, because they begin to feel something they weren't used to feeling with you: consequence. Not punishment, consequence. The consequence of silence after they created silence. The consequence of emptiness after they created distance. The consequence of your attention no longer being free. And here is where people get confused. When an avoidant begins to shift toward you, it can look like love. It can feel like love. It can sound like love. Your heart wants to believe, finally they see me. But I learned to ask better questions because I couldn't afford to be naive with my own heart anymore. Are they shifting because they've grown or because they're scared? Are they shifting because they want to build or because they want to regain control? Are they shifting with consistency or with intensity? Because intensity can be a panic response. Intensity can be fear of loss. Intensity can be the nervous system screaming, "Don't leave." But consistency is character. Consistency is the proof that someone is safe. So I watched what happened after the first wave. I watched whether they showed up again the next day, and the next, and the next. I watched whether they respected my boundary or tried to break it with guilt. I watched whether they took responsibility or acted entitled to my attention. Because when you create emotional distance, the truth surfaces. The truth always surfaces. Either they rise to meet you, or they reveal that they only liked you when you were easy to access and hard to lose. And I won't pretend it didn't hurt to realize how much of their closeness was actually tied to my availability. It hurt to see that the more I pulled away, the more they leaned in, because it made me wonder why my love wasn't valued while it was right there, why my patience wasn't enough, why my presence didn't inspire them to show up, but my absence did. And that's when I understood the deepest lesson. You cannot love someone into emotional maturity. You cannot nurture someone into choosing you. You cannot explain your way into being respected. The only thing you can control is your standard and the courage to hold it. My emotional distance became a boundary that protected the most precious thing I have, my peace. And what I discovered is that peace is magnetic, not because it makes someone panic, but because it changes what you tolerate. When you're peaceful, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop accepting crumbs. You stop calling inconsistency busy. You stop calling silence space. You stop calling fear love. You start seeing clearly. You start choosing slowly. You start requiring effort, not promises. And if they truly shift toward you, let it happen the right way. Let it be earned. Let it be proven. Let it be consistent. Do not collapse your boundary the moment they step closer, because closeness without stability will only restart the cycle. If they want you, they can meet you in the light, not only chase you in the dark. If they value you, they will show up before you detach, not only after you disappear. And if they can't, then your emotional distance is not a tactic that failed. It is a truth that saved you. Because in the end, the biggest shift was never them moving toward me. The biggest shift was me moving back toward myself. Me learning that love should not feel like waiting. Me learning that connection should not feel like anxiety. Me learning that if I have to create distance just to be treated properly, then distance is not the problem. It's the medicine. And I would rather be alone with my dignity than attached to someone who only remembers my value when they feel me leaving. And if they come closer, after you create emotional distance, you don't hand them everything at once. You don't reward panic with permanent access. You don't confuse a few messages with real change. You let them prove it slowly. You let consistency speak. You let actions match words. Because emotional distance isn't about becoming cold, it's about becoming clear, clear enough to stop chasing someone who only feels safe when you're the one doing all the reaching, Clear enough to choose yourself even when your heart still misses them. Clear enough to finally understand that if someone truly wants you, they won't need you to disappear to realize your value. They will protect the connection while you're still standing right there, and if they can't do that, your emotional distance is not a loss, it is your rescue.